Traveller, pause for a moment and imagine a single footprint pressed into ancient ash, preserved through thousands of forgotten seasons, waiting for someone to notice it again. You are not here by accident. Out of billions of drifting minds and countless possible moments, something guided you to this quiet question tonight. What if Earth was a test? Not a metaphor, not a myth, but a carefully balanced experiment. A planet placed in a narrow orbital band where a slight shift could freeze oceans solid or boil them into vapour. A world protected by an invisible magnetic shield thin as a breath yet strong enough to hold life together. Picture it. From space. A blue sphere wrapped in silence carrying repeating patterns older than memory. If this is a test, the universe has been watching for a very long time. Stay with me. A dim blue arc rises slowly from the dark, the edge of Earth, catching sunlight, as if the planet itself is inhaling. There is no sound, no announcement, no signal that anything important is happening. The world simply turns as it has for billions of years, patient and unremarkable from a distance. This is often how profound things begin, quietly, without asking for attention, and yet traveller something in you paused long enough to notice. You are not here by accident. Out of countless drifting thoughts, restless nights, and half-forgotten questions, you arrived at this one moment where the noise thinned just enough for a different idea to surface. Some questions wait years for the right silence. They do not force themselves forward. They wait until the mind slows down, until the world feels distant enough to examine from the outside. Tonight the universe whispers again. I speak to you not as someone who has answers, but as someone who has spent long nights living alongside uncertainty. Nights beneath observatory domes where machines hummed steadily, and starlight fell onto cold sensors. Nights where dust gathered on folded maps and forgotten notebooks, and coffee grew cold beside blinking instruments. In those hours, certainty was always the first thing to disappear. What remained was pattern, not explanation, not meaning. Pattern. Gravity behaves like memory, repeating its rules without hesitation. Radiation moves through space like a whisper that refuses to fade, carrying traces of distant events long after their sources are gone. Light arrives late, delayed by vast distances, showing us the past while pretending to be the present. Over time, it becomes difficult not to feel that the universe is less chaotic than it appears, and more deliberate than we are comfortable admitting. And slowly a thought begins to form. Not suddenly, not dramatically. It arrives the way erosion reshapes stone one grain at a time. What if Earth is not merely a place where life happened to succeed, but a place where life is being observed and not judged, not rewarded or punished? Simply observed the way one watches a system unfold to see what it becomes. If Earth were a test, it would not look like the tests we design. There would be no instructions, no visible boundaries, no clear objectives written at the top of the page. Instead, there would be conditions, carefully balanced parameters, a narrow margin between failure and possibility, and within that margin freedom. Consider where you are. A planet suspended in a precise orbital corridor. Move it slightly closer to its star and oceans boil away. Move it slightly farther and ice locks the surface into silence. This zone is thin, almost uncomfortably, so a fragile band where liquid water can exist for long periods of time. Astronomers call it the habitable zone. Statisticians call it unlikely. And yet here you are breathing without effort. Some explain this with chance, others with necessity. I have learned to sit with silence instead. Silence is the universe thinking, and sometimes thinking takes longer than comfort allows. If Earth is a test, then its design is subtle, rotation slow enough for days and nights to matter, an axial tilt precise enough to create seasons forcing adaptation without making survival impossible. A magnetic field stretched invisibly around the planet, deflecting solar storms that could otherwise strip the atmosphere away like breath from cold glass. A moon improbably large for a planet this size, stabilizing the spin, stirring the oceans, keeping time in gravitational rhythm. None of this is poetic invention. It is measurement, calculation, fact. The unsettling part is not that these conditions exist, it is how close they sit to collapse. A slight deviation and the experiment ends before it truly begins. Observe and notice how rarely the universe chooses excess, how often it works near the edge of instability. Complexity seems to arise not in comfort but in tension, between order and chaos, between abundance and scarcity, between stability and change. If Earth were a test, it would not be testing endurance alone. Stone endures, bacteria endure, ice endures. What appears more fragile and therefore more interesting is awareness, cooperation, memory, the ability to learn not just individually but collectively across generations. Look at deep time and you see resets. Asteroids erase dominant species, ice ages redraw maps, volcanic winters dim the sun for decades. Each event feels catastrophic from the inside, yet from a distance it looks like iteration. Almost nothing survives intact, but something always survives enough to adapt, enough to continue. Geologists call this resilience. Myth calls it rebirth. From orbit, it resembles testing conditions being adjusted. Pressure applied, results observed. Ruins do not announce themselves. They sink. Cities become sediment. Sediment becomes stone. Stone becomes dust again. Erosion is time thinking slowly, and time is remarkably patient. And then unexpectedly intelligence emerges, not once, perhaps not for the first time. There are silences in the record that unsettle careful minds, long stretches where advanced behaviour could have arisen and vanished without leaving clear traces, civilizations before writing, tools before memory, structures dissolved back into geology long before anyone knew how to look for them. Absence is not evidence, but neither is it reassurance. If Earth has been running long enough, iteration is inevitable. Tonight you do not need to fear this thought. It is not a warning, it is not a prophecy, it is an invitation to humility. If this is a test, it may not be graded on intelligence speed or dominance. Those traits rise and fall too easily. It may be graded on response, how life behaves under pressure, how intelligence reacts when resources narrow, how a species treats its own world once it becomes aware that the world can be damaged. From instruments on quiet desks, we have watched atmospheric signatures change, carbon rising, ice retreating, feedback loops tightening faster than models once predicted. Not chaos, feedback. In laboratories, feedback is how you know the system is alive, and still the planet holds. Storms redistribute heat, forests pull carbon back into silence, oceans absorb what they can. Earth does not panic, it adjusts. The oxygen you breathe was shaped by ancient microbes. The calcium in your bones once drifted inside exploding stars. The iron in your blood remembers supernovae. These are not metaphors, they are chemistry, and chemistry does not forget. Somewhere beyond reach, something ancient still moves. Maybe it watches. Maybe it simply waits for outcomes to unfold. Or maybe there is no watcher at all, only a system elegant enough to observe itself through those who arise within it. Tonight you do not need to decide. Awakening is not about answers. It is about noticing the question forming gently, without urgency. If Earth were a test, you would not know when it began, and you would not be told when it ends. You would only feel moments of alignment, pressure, choice, and a quiet sense that this moment, this listening is not entirely random. In the end, traveller, it is all right to not understand. Some mysteries wait, others watch. Tonight the universe whispers again. A thin line of light traces the edge of Earth's atmosphere, glowing faintly against the black like a boundary, drawn by something that understands precision. From this distance the planet does not look alive. It looks engineered, calm, balanced, suspended exactly where it needs to be, no closer, no farther, as if nudged into position and then left to run. When people speak of evidence, they often imagine something dramatic, a signal, a message, a discovery that announces itself with certainty. But the kind of evidence that matters most rarely behaves that way. It accumulates quietly. It hides inside numbers, margins, tolerances. It reveals itself not through what exists, but through how narrowly existence avoids collapse. I learned this slowly through years of looking at charts instead of skies, probability curves instead of constellations. When you begin to calculate how many variables must align for a planet like this to persist, the feeling changes. Earth is not just habitable, It is delicately habitable, balanced on thresholds so fine that even small perturbations echo across millions of years. 1 degree of axial tilt more and seasons become violent. 1 degree less and stagnation settles in. 1% change in atmospheric composition and fire or ice dominates everything. In isolation, each factor seems explainable. Together, they begin to feel coordinated. The orbit alone is unsettling. Earth does not travel in a perfect circle, but in an ellipse so subtle it appears circular to casual observation. That imperfection matters. It allows variation without instability, change without chaos. The gravitational influence of Jupiter, far away yet massive, sweeps debris from the inner solar system, reducing the frequency of catastrophic impacts. Without that distant giant acting as a shield, Earth's surface would be erased far more often than it has been. None of this is speculation. It is measurable, reproducible, accepted. And yet when assembled it reads less like chance and more like constraint. Observer, imagine designing an environment where complexity must arise, but cannot be allowed to run unchecked. You would need danger, but not constant destruction. You would need stability, but not permanence. You would need time, vast forgiving time, and periodic resets to prevent stagnation. You would need to allow failure without allowing total erasure. That is exactly what Earth provides. The geological record is not smooth. It is punctuated. Long periods of relative calm interrupted by sharp disruptions. Mass extinctions that remove dominant species without sterilizing the planet. Each reset clears ecological space, allowing new forms to emerge often more complex than before. Life does not merely recover, it experiments. From a distance, this looks like iteration. What unsettles many scientists is not that extinctions happen, but that they happen at scales that preserve continuity. 5 major mass extinctions in the last 500 million years, and yet life rebounds every time. Not randomly, directionally. Toward complexity, specialization, intelligence. The margins are tight. The timing is curious. It is possible to explain this through natural selection alone. It is also possible to ask whether natural selection itself is the mechanism of the test. The chemistry deepens the unease. Carbon behaves like a universal key capable of forming stable yet flexible bonds. Water expands when it freezes, preventing oceans from solidifying from the bottom up. Plate tectonics recycle carbon and nutrients over geological timescales, stabilizing climate in ways no static crust could. Even the sun cooperates unusually stable for a star of its age and size, emitting energy within a narrow band for billions of years. These are not minor conveniences, they are requirements. Radiation levels are high enough to drive mutation, but not so high as to make genetic information meaningless. Cosmic rays strike Earth constantly, whispering randomness into DNA, nudging evolution forward without tearing it apart. Mutation without annihilation. Variation without noise, overwhelming signal. If this is evidence, it is not evidence of intention in the human sense. It is evidence of calibration. I remember nights when data refused to fit expectation, when models predicted collapse that never arrived, when systems proved more resilient than equations suggested. In those moments, frustration gave way to respect. Earth behaves like something that has been stress-tested over unimaginable spans of time. And then there is time itself. Earth has been stable long enough for intelligence to arise not once, but potentially multiple times. Long enough for memory to accumulate. Long enough for culture, language, technology, and self-awareness to emerge. Many planets may host life briefly. Few appear capable of hosting it patiently. Patience may be the rarest condition of all. Some evidence lies not in the planet, but in us. The way human cognition evolved, not just to survive, but to question, to look outward, to imagine watchers, to search for meaning beyond immediate necessity. Curiosity has no obvious survival advantage once basic needs are met, and yet it persists, intensifies, spreads. We build instruments to see farther than food requires. We map time beyond any individual lifespan. From an evolutionary standpoint, this is inefficient. From a testing standpoint, it is revealing. If Earth were a test, the emergence of self-awareness might be a critical metric. Not intelligence alone, but the ability to reflect on existence itself, to ask whether conditions are accidental, to wonder whether there is structure beneath experience. The fact that this question keeps resurfacing across cultures near us is itself a kind of evidence. Different languages, different myths, different cosmologies, and yet the same intuition repeats life as trial world, as proving ground existence as something that measures as much as it provides. Myth and science rarely agree on details, but they often converge on pattern. The evidence does not point to a visible examiner. There are no fingerprints in the sky, no clear interventions. That absence may be intentional. In any serious experiment, interference is minimized. Systems reveal more when allowed to behave naturally. If something we're observing, Earth remaining hidden, would be essential. And perhaps the strongest evidence is discomfort, the quiet unease that arises when probability feels insufficient, when explanation works but does not satisfy, when numbers align too well too often across too many scales, when randomness produces order repeatedly but never perfection. Evidence in this sense is not proof, it is pressure, a weight that builds slowly until the question can no longer be ignored. What if Earth is not exceptional by accident, but by design of constraints? What if the evidence is not a signal to decode, but a pattern to notice? If so, then understanding may not be the goal. Observation may be enough. In the end, traveller evidence does not demand belief. It invites attention. Some mysteries offer answers, others offer alignment. Tonight the universe whispers again, not to convince you, but to remind you that something about this place, this balance, this timing, is worth sitting with quietly. It is all right to not understand. Some evidence speaks softly, and some truths are felt long before they are named. A faint irregularity appears in the data, barely noticeable at first, like a hairline crack running through polished stone. It is the kind of thing most people overlook, the kind of deviation that can be dismissed as noise if you're tired or impatient. But anomalies have a way of returning. They repeat just often enough to be remembered, just inconsistently enough to resist easy explanation. Over time, they begin to feel less like mistakes and more like messages written in a language that does not want to be translated too quickly. In the long history of Earth, anomalies are everywhere. Sudden leaps instead of gradual change, bursts of complexity that appear faster than models predict, extinctions that remove dominant forms but spare fragile ones. Consciousness emerging from matter that by all simple measures should not think at all. These are not violations of physics, they obey the rules, but they lean against the edges of what those rules were expected to produce. I remember staring at timelines where nothing happens for millions of years, and then suddenly everything changes. Cells cooperate, life multicellularizes, brains grow disproportionately large, language appears, symbols begin to matter. From a distance, evolution is smooth. Up close, it is punctuated, hesitant, almost improvisational. It advances, pauses, retreats, then accelerates again, as if responding to pressures that are not evenly distributed. If Earth were a test, anomalies would not be errors. They would be stress points, places where the system is pushed to see what emerges when equilibrium is disturbed. In engineering, anomalies reveal structure. They show where tolerance ends and adaptation begins. A system that never produces anomalies is either trivial or dead. Look at the sky. The sun should not be this stable. Stars of similar size often fluctuate more dramatically, shortening the window for complex life. Yet ours burns with remarkable consistency, allowing billions of years of chemical patience. Look at the moon. Its size relative to Earth is anomalous, stabilizing axial tilt, and tides in ways that appear excessive for a random outcome. Look at Jupiter again, massive and distant sweeping debris, with gravitational authority reducing catastrophe, just enough to preserve continuity. Each anomaly can be explained in isolation. Together they form a pattern that resists indifference. On the surface of Earth, anomalies continue. Humans appear late yet accelerate change faster than any previous species. In a geological instant, forests fall, atmospheres shift, extinction rates climb. This is often framed as recklessness, and it may be, but it is also unprecedented. No other life form has altered planetary systems consciously. Awareness itself becomes a geological force. That alone is anomalous. If intelligence were merely a survival tool, it would plateau once basic needs were secured. Instead, it expands outward. It builds instruments to see what survival does not require seeing. It invents mathematics that describes realities far beyond immediate experience. It asks questions about origins, endings, and observers. It wonders whether it is alone or whether it is being watched. From a strictly evolutionary perspective, this is inefficient. From the perspective of a test, curiosity might be the point. Anomalies also appear in memory. Humans remember beyond necessity. We preserve stories long after their practical value fades. We build monuments not to survive, but to be remembered. We record catastrophes so they are not repeated, and then repeat them anyway, as if testing the limits of forgetting. Memory behaves less like storage, and more like gravity, pulling the past into the present whether we invite it or not. Archaeology is filled with anomalies that refuse to settle, structures whose precision exceeds what their supposed tools allow, alignments that reference celestial cycles far longer than a human lifespan, myths that encode astronomical knowledge without naming it directly. Again, none of this proves intervention, but it suggests attention, care, observations stretched across generations. Dust covers ruins, but dust is not erasure. Dust is leftover chronology. In laboratories, anomalies are treated with suspicion. They threaten clean conclusions. They demand replication scrutiny, humility. Some are discarded, others redefine entire fields. The discovery of cosmic background radiation was once an anomaly. So was the accelerating expansion of the universe. So were the first signs that space-time itself could ripple. The universe progresses not by confirmation, but by disruption. If Earth is a test, anomalies may be the moments when the system checks itself, when it asks quietly what happens now. What happens if intelligence appears? What happens if intelligence alters its environment faster than feedback can stabilize it? What happens if a species becomes capable of recognizing the test itself? The last anomaly is the most dangerous and the most interesting. Self-awareness changes behavior. In every experiment, subjects behave differently once they suspect they are being observed. Performance shifts, authenticity blurs, strategy replaces instinct. If Earth were a test widespread, certainty would corrupt the data. Doubt would be preserved intentionally. Clarity would be withheld. Anomalies then would function as hints rather than revelations, enough to provoke curiosity, not enough to confirm belief. I've sat with that discomfort many times, the feeling that explanation is close yet always incomplete, that every model fits until it doesn't, that the universe allows understanding but never ownership. This is not failure, it is boundary. Some anomalies may not be designed at all. They may simply be the inevitable result of complex systems interacting across vast timescales. But inevitability does not remove significance. In a test, outcomes can be emergent rather than scripted. The test need not know the result in advance to learn from it. If Earth were a test, it would be open-ended. Perhaps anomalies are not messages from outside, but mirrors held up by the system itself. Points where we are forced to confront the limits of prediction, where humility becomes necessary, where certainty dissolves and observation deepens. There is a quiet peace in that realization. Anomalies do not demand resolution, they demand patience. They ask you to sit with uncertainty without forcing it into meaning too quickly, to accept that not every deviation is a threat and not every mystery is meant to close. Tonight, traveller, let the anomalies remain unresolved. Let them drift at the edge of awareness like distant stars whose light reaches you long after their source has changed. Some mysteries are not interruptions. They are invitations. In the end, it is all right to not understand. Some anomalies persist because they are doing their work simply by existing. Tonight the universe whispers again, not in answers but in deviations that remind you this system is alive, unfinished, and still unfolding. The first thing you notice when you stop searching for explanations is how quiet the universe really is. Not empty, not dead, but restrained. Signals travel endlessly through space, yet almost nothing answers back. Radio waves drift outward, growing thinner, older, less recognizable with every passing year. Telescopes listen with patience that borders on devotion, and still the cosmos responds mostly with absence. Silence is not nothing. Silence is information withheld. In science, silence is often dismissed as lack of data, but over time it becomes its own kind of signal. When you expect noise and receive quiet instead, the quiet begins to matter. Earth sits in a universe that should be loud with activity, yet remains strangely alone. No unmistakable transmissions, no clear artifacts, no obvious neighbours, just distance repetition and the hum of background radiation like a memory of something long finished. This is not what many expected. It is in itself an anomaly of scale. If Earth were a test, silence would be essential. In any controlled environment, interference ruins results. Too much guidance collapses autonomy. Too much information biases behaviour. Silence preserves authenticity. It forces participants to act without knowing whether they are observed guided or entirely alone. The quiet becomes part of the condition shaping decisions without directing them. I have spent long hours listening to instruments calibrated to detect the faintest deviations in cosmic noise. There is a peculiar tension in that listening. You are always waiting for something that may never come. Over time, expectation softens into acceptance. You begin to understand that listening itself is the experiment. What matters is not what answers, but how long you are willing to remain attentive in the absence of reply. Silence also shapes human history. Civilizations rise without instructions. They invent meaning where none is given explicitly. They argue over origins, purposes, and endings, because the universe does not clarify them. If a voice spoke clearly from the sky, culture would collapse into compliance. Instead, ambiguity reigns. Belief fragments, philosophy multiplies. Science advances slowly constrained by evidence rather than certainty. This is not inefficiency, it is filtration. In a test designed to observe development, silence separates imitation from insight. It reveals who acts ethically without reward, who cooperates without command, who seeks understanding without guarantee of resolution. Noise would corrupt these measures. Silence preserves them. Even on Earth, silence precedes transformation. Before tectonic shifts, pressure builds invisibly. Before storms, the air stills. Before extinction events, ecosystem appear stable. Silence is often the final condition before change, not because nothing is happening, but because everything is aligning beneath perception. Look at geological time. Millions of years pass with little apparent alteration, then suddenly coastlines redraw themselves, climates, flip species vanish. From inside those moments, collapse feels random. From a distance, it feels prepared. Stored energy released. Deferred consequences arriving all at once. Silence does not mean inactivity. It means accumulation. Human consciousness follows the same pattern. Long periods of assumption, tradition, repetition, followed by sudden shifts in worldview. Agriculture, writing, science, industry. Each arrives after long silences where conditions matured unnoticed. Ideas do not announce themselves early. They incubate. If Earth is a test, silence may be the interval between questions. The unsettling possibility is that silence is not absence of watchers, but restraint. Observation without interference. Attention without instruction. In laboratories, the most valuable data comes from subjects left undisturbed. Any signal sent back risks altering the outcome. If something were observing Earth, its greatest discipline would be not to speak. This interpretation reframes loneliness. Humanity often looks into the sky and asks why no one answers. But perhaps the lack of response is the point. Perhaps answering would fail the test. Silence also forces internal reference. Without external validation, values must be generated rather than received. Morality becomes a choice rather than a command. Meaning becomes constructed rather than assigned. This is risky. Many will choose poorly. But risk is essential to measurement. A test without the possibility of failure reveals nothing. There is a quiet dread in that thought, but also a quiet dignity. I have noticed that the longer one sits with silence, the less threatening it feels. At first it demands explanation, then justification. Eventually it becomes space to observe one's own reactions, restlessness, hope, fear, curiosity. Silence reflects back the observer. Perhaps that is the most important function of cosmic quiet. It turns attention inward. It reveals whether the drive to understand is genuine or conditional, whether kindness persists without recognition, whether curiosity survives without promise of answer. In a universe that speaks clearly, belief is easy. In a universe that remains silent, belief becomes choice. Earth exists within that silence, evolving culture, science and self-awareness, without confirmation that any of it matters beyond itself. And still people search. Still they build telescopes. Still they write equations describing realities they may never touch. Still they protect strangers, preserve art and mourn extinct species they will never meet. From the perspective of a test, this persistence is remarkable. Silence also equalizes. Without revelation, no single culture receives privileged truth. Knowledge must be earned incrementally. Mistakes are universal. Progress is uneven. This prevents any one narrative from dominating completely. Diversity of interpretation becomes a feature rather than a flaw. If Earth were guided openly, history would be linear. Instead, it is recursive. Themes repeat, errors reappear, lessons are learned, forgotten, and learned again. This inefficiency frustrates those seeking purpose. But from an observational standpoint, repetition is data. It shows what sticks and what erodes under pressure. Silence allows erosion to speak. There is also the possibility that silence is temporary, that it lasts only until the threshold is crossed. In many systems, feedback appears only after critical mass is reached. Before that point, signals are intentionally absent. Once crossed, interaction becomes inevitable. If that is true, then silence is not the absence of a test administrator, but the condition before the next phase. A waiting room without clocks. But speculation is not required to feel the weight of quiet. You feel it already in moments when the world stops asking for performance, late nights, empty roads, the pause between breaths. In those moments, something older than language settles in. The sense that existence continues without commentary, that the universe does not rush you. Silence then is not threatening, is not. It is permission. Permission to proceed without certainty, to act without applause, to care without assurance that it will be noticed. If Earth is a test, silence ensures that what emerges is not rehearsed. Tonight, traveller, allow the silence to remain unbroken. Let it hold the question without pressing for resolution. Some mysteries are not meant to speak yet. Others may never speak at all. That does not make them empty. In the end, it is all right to not understand. Silence is the universe. Thinking and thought takes time beyond measure. Tonight the universe whispers again by saying nothing at all. There is a layer beneath history that most people never think about, a depth of time so vast that human memory barely reaches its surface. When you study Earth long enough, you begin to sense it not as a sequence of stories, but as a palimpsest written over again and again, each era erasing most of what came before it. Civilizations fade, continents drift, oceans rise and retreat, and what remains is not narrative but pressure, heat, and stone quietly recording outcomes without explanation. In this deeper view, epochs do not end politely. They are buried. Forests collapse into coal. Cities dissolve into sediment. Shorelines migrate thousands of kilometers away from where they once stood. The planet does not archive intent-only consequence. What we call prehistory is not the beginning of the story, but the point at which memory becomes unreliable and silence takes over again. If Earth were a test, forgotten epochs would not be accidents. They would be expected results. Any long-running system that measures adaptation across deep time must accept loss as part of its method. Memory cannot be allowed to accumulate indefinitely. If every generation inherited full knowledge of all previous outcomes, the system would stagnate. Learning would cease to be authentic. Forgetting then becomes a necessary feature. Geology supports this more than myth ever could. Plate tectonics recycle the crust on timescales that erase nearly all surface evidence. Ocean floors are young, rarely older than 200 million years, constantly renewed, constantly wiping away what once existed. Entire coastlines vanish into subduction zones. Whatever stood there is not preserved. It is returned to heat and pressure reduced to raw material. From this perspective, the absence of evidence for earlier advanced civilizations is not surprising. It is expected. Earth is efficient at erasing complexity once it no longer serves the present configuration. Stone remembers stress, not culture. Isotopes remember decay, not names. Dust remembers weight, not intention. This is uncomfortable for a species that records obsessively. Humans fear forgetting because forgetting implies meaninglessness. But the planet does not share that concern. It measures continuity, not legacy. If Earth is a test, the score is not kept in monuments. It is kept in resilience. There are moments, however, when the erosion feels incomplete. Out-of-place artifacts, structures aligned with astronomical cycles far longer than a single lifespan, myths that encode celestial mechanics without naming them. These do not prove anything on their own, but they suggest that knowledge has appeared perhaps briefly before being reabsorbed into geology. The idea of forgotten epochs unsettles because it removes uniqueness. It implies repetition. That intelligence may arise, test its environment, fail to stabilize and be reset. Again and again, not as punishment, but as process. A long experiment with many iterations, each one adjusting parameters slightly based on what came before. In such a system, humanity would not be the first attempt, only the current one. That thought carries no inherent judgment. It simply reframes urgency. If others rose and fell before us, then awareness alone does not guarantee continuation. Memory is not protection. Technology is not immunity. I have stared at stratigraphic columns where millions of years collapse into a few centimeters of rock. Entire worlds compressed into thin bands of color. You begin to understand how quickly significance disappears when time is allowed to work uninterrupted. From that vantage, the present moment feels both precious and provisional. Forgotten epochs also suggest something more subtle, that the test, if it exists, does not aim for permanence. Permanence is brittle. It resists change until it shatters. Instead, the system seems optimized for renewal. Destruction clears space. Extinction resets trajectories. Silence returns long enough for something new to attempt coherence. Life does not move forward in a straight line. It oscillates. Complexity rises, collapses, and re-emerges in altered forms. This pattern appears in ecosystems, in climate cycles, in civilizations, and even in individual lives. Growth followed by simplification. Expansion followed by contraction. The rhythm repeats across scales. If Earth were merely a random environment, this repetition would be tragic. If it were a test, it would be instructive. Forgotten epochs also explain a strange humility embedded in scientific practice. The more we learn, the more provisional knowledge becomes. Every theory is framed with an expiration date. Every model is understood as incomplete. Certainty is temporary. Revision is expected. This mindset mirrors the planet's own behavior. Nothing is final. Everything is subject to reworking. There is comfort in that alignment. Science does not promise permanence. It promises approximation. In a test-like universe, approximation may be the only honest outcome. The idea that civilizations can vanish entirely without trace forces a re-evaluation of progress. Progress cannot be measured by accumulation alone. It must be measured by integration. How deeply new knowledge becomes embedded into behavior rather than structure. Stone can fall, steel can rust, digital records can decay. But patterns of cooperation, restraint, and adaptation, if internalized, may persist, even when material evidence is lost. Perhaps that is why morality appears so often in human myth as the central lesson. Not because morality is rewarded externally, but because it survives erosion better than technology. A society that internalizes restraint may outlast one that merely accumulates tools. From a testing perspective, this distinction would matter greatly. Forgotten epochs also place the present in a strange light. The acceleration of change feels unprecedented, but acceleration itself may be a recurring feature near the end of cycles. Pressure builds, systems destabilize, feedback loops tighten, the environment tests limits more aggressively. What feels like crisis from the inside may be transition from the outside. That does not guarantee survival. It guarantees significance. If Earth is a test, then epochs are chapters, not conclusions. Forgetting is not failure. It is reset. The real question is not whether a civilization leaves traces, but whether it alters the trajectory of what comes after it. Influence without memory. Impact without monument. Tonight, traveller, allow yourself to imagine that this is not the first time intelligence has wondered whether it is being measured. That others may have asked the same questions beneath different skies, only to be folded back into geology before answers arrived. That the silence you feel now may have been felt before. This does not diminish you. It places you inside a pattern larger than identity. In the end, it is all right to not understand. Forgotten epochs remind us that understanding is temporary, but participation is inevitable. You are here now within this iteration, carrying awareness into a moment that will eventually be erased like all others. What remains is how you move through it. Some mysteries wait, others are buried. Tonight the universe whispers again through layers of time, reminding you that even forgotten things once mattered, and that may be enough. There is a moment in every long experiment when conditions change, abruptly, not as punishment but as recalibration. In Earth's history, these moments appear as resets, sharp interruptions in otherwise gradual processes, where complexity is reduced and the system is given space to reorganize. From within the moment, a reset feels like catastrophe. From a distance, it looks like maintenance. Pressure is released. Variables are rebalanced. The system continues altered but intact. On this planet, resets arrive in many forms. Ice ages lock away water and redraw habitable zones. Volcanic winters dim the sun and collapse food chains. Asteroids strike with energies that erase dominance without sterilizing life itself. Each event seems excessive until you notice what survives. Not the largest, not the strongest, but the adaptable, the quiet, the resilient. Reset does not eliminate life, it filters it. If Earth were a test, reset would be one of its most important mechanisms. Any system allowed to run indefinitely without interruption accumulates fragility. Complexity piles upon itself until small stresses cause disproportionate failure. Resets prevent that. They simplify. They remove excess. They return the system to conditions where experimentation can resume. In this sense, extinction is not an end, but a pause followed by redirection. Geology confirms this rhythm. After every mass extinction, biodiversity eventually rebounds, often surpassing previous levels. New niches open, new forms arise. Evolution does not mourn what was lost. It uses the empty space. From a testing perspective, this is efficient. You do not need to preserve every outcome. You need to see what happens next. Resets are not evenly spaced. They cluster unpredictably. Long periods of stability are followed by sudden collapse. This irregularity matters. Predictable resets could be planned around. Unpredictable ones reveal genuine response. How life behaves when the rules shift without warning says far more than how it behaves when conditions are known in advance. Human history mirrors this pattern on smaller scales. Empires expand, consolidate, overextend and fracture. Economic systems grow complex, then collapse under their own weight. Cultural paradigms dominate, stagnate, and are replaced. Each cycle feels unique to those inside it, yet the structure repeats with unsettling consistency. Reset is not a failure of civilization. It is part of its rhythm. From the inside, resets are traumatic. Memory is lost. Knowledge fragments. Progress appears wasted. But the system does not value memory the way individuals do. It values trajectory. What matters is not what was known, but what can be known next under new conditions. Reset clears noise. It removes assumptions that no longer hold. There is a quiet cruelty in this, but also a quiet fairness. No species, no culture, no structure is exempt. Reset does not target morality or intention. It responds to imbalance. When feedback loops exceed tolerance, the system corrects. This is not judgment, it is physics applied at scale. If Earth is a test, then reset is the moment when the test advances to the next section. Not because the previous one was failed, but because enough data has been gathered. The environment changes not to erase learning, but to see whether learning has been internalized deeply enough to persist under new constraints. This reframes fear. The possibility of reset is not a threat meant to induce panic. It is a condition meant to induce awareness. Systems that understand they are not permanent behave differently from those that assume continuity. They prioritize integration over accumulation. They build flexibility instead of monuments. I've seen this principle in small systems as well. In laboratories, protocols are reset after contamination. In computing processes, restart after instability. In biology, sleep itself functions as a daily reset clearing. Waste, reorganizing memory, preparing the system for continued operation. Reset is not destructive by default. It is restorative when understood. The danger arises when a system resists reset entirely, when it clings to a configuration beyond its useful lifespan. That resistance builds tension. When correction finally arrives, it is harsher than it would have been otherwise. This is true in ecosystems, societies, and individual lives. Reset delayed becomes collapse. If humanity is approaching a reset point, it may not arrive as a single dramatic event. It may unfold gradually disguised as normal difficulty. Resource stress, environmental feedback, cultural fragmentation, each pressure manageable in isolation, overwhelming in combination. From within, it will feel like failure. From outside, it may look like transition. This does not guarantee renewal. Reset creates possibility, not outcome. What follows depends on what persists. Values embedded into behavior rather than structure. Knowledge internalized rather than archived. Cooperation chosen without enforcement. These are the traits that survive resets because they do not depend on stability to function. If Earth were a test, reset would reveal whether intelligence has learned this distinction, whether it has confused progress with permanence, whether it has mistaken accumulation for understanding. The reset phase is where the test becomes most honest, because there is no longer room to pretend that the old rules apply. Tonight, traveller, this is not a warning. It is a pattern observed across scales. Reset is not something to fear, but something to recognize. It reminds you that continuity is conditional, and that adaptation is always more valuable than control. In the end, it is all right to not understand when or how resets arrive. They are not messages meant to be decoded. They are processes meant to be lived through. Some mysteries wait. Others return us to the beginning. Tonight the universe whispers again, not of endings, but of clearing space for whatever comes next. After every reset, something lingers, not structure, not certainty, but resonance. An echo is what remains when the original sound has already faded, a vibration travelling through space long after its source has gone quiet. Earth is full of these echoes. They move through geology, through biology, through human behaviour, repeating patterns that feel strangely familiar, even when their origins are forgotten. You can hear echoes in the fossil record, body plans that vanish then reappear in altered forms, limb-sized nervous systems reinvented again and again, as if life is circling a set of solutions it never fully abandons. Evolution does not start from nothing after a reset. It remembers through constraint. Certain paths are easier to rediscover than others. Certain forms resonate with the physics of this world. Echo works the same way in human history. Societies collapse, knowledge fragments, languages disappear, and yet similar ideas return. Hierarchies form. Trade networks emerge. Myths about floods, fires, and falling skies repeat across continents that never touched. The stories differ, but the structure is the same. Warning, loss, survival, renewal. These are not coincidences. They are memory without a narrator. If Earth were a test, echo would be how learning persists without instruction. Direct memory would bias outcomes. Echo preserves influence while allowing freedom. It does not tell the next iteration what to do. It simply shapes what feels intuitive, what feels dangerous, what feels worth repeating. In this way, the system teaches without speaking. There are nights when I have noticed this in myself. Familiar reactions surfacing in unfamiliar situations, a sense of déjà vu that has no personal explanation, instincts that seem older than experience. It is tempting to dismiss this as psychology, but psychology itself is an echo shaped by countless prior lives adapting to similar pressures. Fear of heights, comfort near fire, unease in silence. These are not learned in one lifetime. They are inherited responses to long-tested conditions. Echo is also visible in our technologies. Every tool carries the imprint of what came before it. Stone blades become metal blades. Written ledgers become digital databases. Networks repeat the logic of neural systems. Even artificial intelligence is modelled on biological precedent. Innovation feels revolutionary from the inside, but from a distance it is iterative. Old solutions refined, not replaced. This repetition frustrates those who expect progress to be linear. But Echo does not move forward. It moves outwards, spreading influence across time. In a test-like universe, this makes sense. You do not want each iteration to begin blind. You want tendencies, preferences, and cautionary pressures to persist without dictating outcomes. Earth itself is an echo chamber. Mountain ranges follow ancient fault lines. Rivers trace paths carved long before humans existed. Climate patterns oscillate within ranges set millions of years ago. Even disasters repeat along familiar boundaries. Fire returns to fire-adapted landscapes. Floods revisit floodplains. The planet remembers through shape. If intelligence is part of the test, then intelligence must learn to recognize echoes without mistaking them for destiny. This is a delicate balance. Ignoring echoes leads to repeated mistakes. Obsessing over them leads to paralysis. The system seems to reward awareness without fixation. Human culture struggles with this balance. We study history to avoid repeating it, then repeat it anyway. We memorialize collapse, then rebuild the same vulnerabilities. Perhaps this is not failure but calibration. Each repetition tests whether understanding has deepened enough to alter response. Echo also explains why certain questions never go away. Are we alone? Are we being watched? Does existence have purpose? These questions surface, subside, and resurface across eras. They are not solved because they are not meant to be. They function as probes, testing whether awareness has reached a level where such questions can be held without panic. If Earth were not a test, these echoes would be noise. If it were, they would be feedback. There is a quiet humility in recognizing yourself as an echo carrier. Your thoughts shaped by forces older than memory. Your fears tuned by extinct environments. Your hopes aligned with patterns that have outlasted species. This does not diminish individuality. It contextualizes it. You are not isolated. You are resonant. Echo also offers comfort. It means that nothing begins entirely alone, that even after loss something carries forward. Not names or achievements, but tendencies, ways of responding, preferences for cooperation over isolation, curiosity over stagnation. These traits survive resets because they are not tied to any one structure. In the long view, Echo may be the true measure of success in a test-like world. Not what is built, but what repeats. Not what is remembered consciously, but what shapes instinct. A civilization that embeds restraint, empathy, and adaptability into behavior may fail materially and still succeed functionally influencing what comes next. This reframes legacy. Legacy is not what you leave behind. It is what echoes through others without attribution. A way of thinking, a pattern of care, a refusal to repeat certain harms. These are difficult to measure, but they persist more reliably than monuments. Tonight, traveller noticed the echoes within you, the familiar pull toward meaning, the recurring questions that resurface in quiet moments, the sense that some choices matter more than they should. These are not instructions, they are resonances. In the end, it is all right to not understand where echoes originate. They do not demand explanation to function. Some mysteries are preserved not as answers, but as vibrations that guide motion, long after the source is gone. Tonight the universe whispers again through echo, reminding you that even in silence nothing is entirely lost. At a certain depth of observation, randomness begins to lose its authority. Events still appear chaotic on the surface, but beneath them repetition emerges. Not exact duplication, but structure. This is where pattern lives not as prediction, but as tendency. Earth reveals these tendencies slowly, like a code written in pressure, temperature, and time rather than symbols or language. Patterns appear first in physics. Orbits stabilize within narrow margins. Constants fall into ranges that allow matter to persist. Energy disperses in predictable ways following gradients that favor balance over extremes. These are not decisions, they are constraints. Yet within them, complexity flourishes. Life emerges not because the universe intends it, but because conditions permit it. Or perhaps because conditions test for it. Geology is patterned patience. Layers stack, compress, fracture, and reform according to rules that rarely change. Mountains rise where plates converge. Trenches deepen where crust sinks. Volcanoes return to familiar scars. Even after millions of years, Earth prefers certain motions. It repeats them until something forces adjustment. Pattern is not stagnation. It is habit. Biology follows suit. Life does not explore every possibility evenly. It returns again and again to familiar solutions. Bilateral symmetry, modular organs, hierarchical control systems. These designs are not optimal in all cases, but they are reliable. In a test-like environment, reliability matters more than novelty. The system favors what survives stress, not what dazzles. Human behavior mirrors this. Despite cultural variation, certain social structures recur. Power concentrates. Trade networks form hubs. Belief systems encode moral shortcuts. Periods of expansion give way to correction. We tell ourselves we are different this time, but the arc bends the same way. Pattern does not negate free will. It frames it. If Earth were a test, pattern would be the grading rubric hidden in plain sight. Not a checklist of actions, but a set of tendencies the system responds to consistently. Cooperation stabilizes. Excess destabilizes. Short-term gain increases long-term volatility. These are not moral judgments. They are feedback loops. One of the most persistent patterns is escalation. Systems grow until they exceed their support structures. Complexity increases faster than resilience. Signals become delayed. Corrections overshoot. Collapse follows. This pattern appears in ecosystems, economies, climates, and technologies. It is not unique to humans. It is what happens when growth outpaces awareness. Another pattern is recovery. After collapse, systems simplify. Redundancies vanish. Dependencies shrink. What remains is often more robust than what came before, at least temporarily. This is not progress in a linear sense. It is oscillation around viability. In a testing framework, oscillation reveals limits more effectively than steady ascent. Patterns are also evident in how questions evolve. Early civilizations asked how to survive. Later ones asked how to organize. Now we ask how to persist without destroying ourselves. The questions shift as constraints tighten. Awareness expands until it encounters its own consequences. This is not coincidence. It is curriculum. I have noticed this in long nights spent watching data accumulate. Trends emerge only after enough noise cancels itself out. Early readings mislead. Short-term anomalies distract. Only patience reveals structure. The same is true of history. Only distance reveals pattern. Living inside it, we mistake it for chaos. Pattern explains why certain warnings feel ancient even when delivered through modern language. Climate instability, resource depletion, social fragmentation. These are not new dangers. They are recurring signals that thresholds are being approached again. Pattern does not announce itself loudly. It repeats softly until ignored too long. If Earth is not a test, pattern is simply the outcome of constrained systems interacting. If it is a test, pattern is instruction without enforcement. No rulebook, no supervisor, only response. The environment answers behavior with consequence consistently enough that intelligence can learn if it chooses to observe. The challenge is that pattern does not reward belief, it rewards alignment. Understanding without adaptation changes nothing. Recognition without response leads to repetition. In this sense, pattern is indifferent to intent. It measures integration. Has awareness altered behavior or merely narrative? This is where many civilizations falter. They notice the pattern intellectually but fail to embody it structurally. They predict collapse and continue anyway. Knowledge accumulates faster than restraint. From a testing perspective, this is informative. It shows where intelligence plateaus, where reflection fails to translate into change. Pattern also reveals something hopeful. That improvement does not require perfection. Small shifts in behavior can alter trajectory significantly over time. Feedback loops are sensitive, delay a collapse, soften an extreme, increase redundancy. These adjustments matter. Pattern is not destiny. It is probability shaped by response. Tonight, observer, you are inside a pattern, whether you acknowledge it or not. Your choices contribute to signals the system responds to, not immediately, not visibly, but cumulatively. This is not about blame, it is about placement. You are part of a structure larger than intention. In the end, it is all right to not understand the full pattern. No single perspective ever does. But noticing that pattern exists changes posture. It invites humility. It encourages listening over assertion. Some mysteries are not puzzles to be solved, but currents to be navigated. Tonight, the universe whispers again through repetition and rhythm, reminding you that even in apparent randomness, something consistent is unfolding. And whether that unfolding is a test or simply the nature of existence, you're already participating carried gently within the pattern itself. Warnings rarely arrive as single moments. They accumulate quietly layered signals that grow harder to ignore only after they have been present for a long time. Earth does not shout its warnings. It repeats them. Temperatures drift, systems strain, boundaries blur. From inside, the moment each change feels manageable, even familiar. From a distance, the pattern sharpens into something unmistakable. In nature, warning takes the form of thresholds. Ice reflects light until it melts, then absorbs heat, and accelerates its own disappearance. Forests absorb carbon until drought weakens them, then fire releases what was stored all at once. Oceans buffer heat until chemistry shifts and ecosystems unravel. These are not punishments. They are signals that balance has been exceeded. If Earth were a test, warnings would be essential. A test without feedback teaches nothing. But feedback does not have to be obvious. Subtlety reveals more than force. A system that responds gently at first allows observation. It gives intelligence a chance to notice correlation before consequence becomes unavoidable. Human history shows a repeated failure to take early warnings seriously, not because they are invisible, but because they are gradual. Slow change does not trigger urgency. Minds evolve to respond to immediate threats, struggle with extended timelines. By the time danger feels real, options have narrowed. This limitation may itself be part of what is being measured. Awareness is not enough. Recognition without response is indistinguishable from ignorance in its outcome. A warning only matters if it alters behavior. Otherwise, it becomes background noise absorbed into normalcy until collapse reframes it retroactively as obvious. Warnings also test priorities. They force trade-offs. Short-term comfort versus long-term stability. Individual gain versus collective resilience. Certainty versus precaution. There is no neutral choice. Even inaction is a decision one that preserves existing trajectories, rather than questioning them. I have watched warning signs emerge in datasets long before they became public concern. Anomalies dismissed as noise, trends explained away as temporary. It is never malice that delays response. It is habit. Systems defend their assumptions because changing them is costly. The deeper the investment, the stronger the resistance. From a testing perspective, this resistance is informative. It reveals how intelligence behaves when faced with inconvenient information. Does it adapt or does it rationalize? Does it reduce risk or does it gamble on delay? Warnings expose not just capacity but character. Earth's warnings are not limited to climate. Social systems signal strain through polarization, erosion of trust, and the normalization of instability. Economic systems warn through inequality, fragility, and cascading failures. Technological systems warn through unintended consequences that outpace governance. These signals emerge independently, yet they converge toward the same question: can complexity be managed without self-destruction? If Earth were not a test, warnings would still matter. If it were, they would be among the clearest indicators of progression. A system that responds to warnings early demonstrates learning. One that ignores them demonstrates repetition. Warnings also create space for humility. They remind intelligence that control is partial and foresight limited. Acting under uncertainty is difficult but necessary. Waiting for certainty is itself a choice, often the most dangerous one. The system does not require perfection. It requires adjustment. There is quiet cruelty in delayed warnings. By the time effects are undeniable, those least responsible often suffer first. This asymmetry tests empathy. Does awareness translate into protection for the vulnerable or into insulation for the powerful? The response reveals values more clearly than any declaration. Warnings are also moral mirrors. They ask whether intelligence defines success narrowly or expansively. Is survival enough, or does survival require fairness? Is progress measured by speed or by sustainability? These questions cannot be postponed indefinitely. Eventually, the system answers them through consequence. If Earth is a test, warnings may be the final open book section. The information is available. The patterns are visible. The outcomes are not hidden. What remains uncertain is response. Will intelligence treat warnings as obstacles to be overcome, or as messages to be integrated? Tonight, traveller warnings are not predictions. They are invitations. They do not dictate outcome. They reveal possibility. The future is not written, but it is constrained by how warnings are handled in the present. In the end, it is all right to not know exactly where warnings lead. They are not maps. They are signals. Some mysteries wait. Others press gently against awareness, asking not for belief but for attention. Tonight the universe whispers again through warning, reminding you that noticing is only the first step, and that what follows is where meaning quietly takes shape. The sky has always been where humanity places its unanswered questions. Long before instruments and equations, people looked upward and sensed that whatever governs existence does not reside entirely on the ground. The sky is distant enough to feel impartial, vast enough to feel intentional. It holds patterns that repeat with patience, movements that ignore borders, and events that unfold on timescales indifferent to human urgency. From a scientific view, the sky is a record of conditions beyond Earth, radiation arriving from ancient stars, particles that have travelled for millions of years before touching atmosphere. Light stretched thin by expansion, carrying information from epochs long finished. Every night the sky delivers data without commentary. It does not explain itself. It simply arrives. If Earth were a test, the sky would be the reference frame, the constant against which all local experiments are measured. While surface conditions change, the sky maintains continuity. Stars follow predictable paths. Orbits repeat. Eclipses arrive on schedule. This regularity is not comforting by accident. It is calibration. It allows intelligence to notice when something deviates. Human civilizations have always used the sky as a guide. Agriculture aligned to solstices, monuments oriented to stars, calendars derived from planetary motion. These were not acts of worship alone. They were acts of synchronization. Aligning behavior with larger cycles reduces error. It embeds local decisions into cosmic rhythm. The sky also introduces humility. It reminds intelligence that it is not central. Earth is one body among countless others, orbiting an average star in a galaxy that is neither unique nor permanent. This perspective can be destabilizing, but it is also corrective. Systems that believe they are singular tend to behave recklessly. Systems that recognize context tend to conserve. In recent centuries, instruments have extended this awareness. Telescopes reveal galaxies receding. Spectra reveal chemical fingerprints older than Earth itself. We now know that the elements composing human bodies were forged elsewhere long before the planet existed. This alone reframes identity. You are not only of Earth, you are of processes far older and far less concerned with outcome. If Earth is a test, the sky may not be watching in the way myths imagined. No eyes, no judgment. Observation could simply mean correlation. The environment responds to behavior because everything is connected through physical law. In that sense, the sky is not a supervisor. It is a boundary condition. Yet there are moments when the sky feels less passive. Sudden flashes, anomalous signals, objects passing through the solar system on trajectories that do not belong. These events are usually explainable eventually, but the delay between occurrence and understanding matters. In that gap, imagination awakens. Questions surface not because answers are absent, but because meaning feels briefly accessible. Those moments test restraint. Do we project intention where there is none? Do we dismiss anomalies prematurely to protect certainty? Or do we observe carefully, allowing uncertainty to exist without demanding resolution? The sky teaches patience because it cannot be hurried. There is also the psychological dimension. Looking upward creates distance from immediate concerns. Problems that feel overwhelming on the ground shrink under a wider frame. This does not solve them, but it alters posture. Anxiety reduces when perspective increases. In a test-like environment, this effect would be useful. It encourages reflection over reaction. The sky also reminds us that time does not move uniformly. Light arriving tonight may have left its source before humans existed. The present contains layers of the past. Actions taken now will propagate forward in ways that cannot be fully traced. Responsibility extends beyond perception. I have spent nights beneath open skies, with instruments humming softly, collecting signals that mean nothing on their own. Only after long integration does structure emerge. The sky rewards patience, not certainty. It does not care whether you believe in meaning. It responds only to alignment with reality. If Earth were not a test, the sky would still function this way. But if it were, the sky would be part of the lesson. It teaches scale. It teaches limitation. It teaches that intelligence does not stand apart from the system it studies. Observer and observed are entangled through measurement and consequence. This matters because many failures arise from forgetting scale. Acting as if local success guarantees global stability, as if short-term control implies long-term viability. The sky contradicts this assumption every night. Nothing remains fixed. Everything moves within constraints. There is no instruction written in the stars, no final message encoded in light. But there is consistency. The universe behaves the same way regardless of belief. This consistency allows learning. It allows correction. It allows intelligence to refine itself against something that does not adapt in response to preference. Tonight, listener, when you imagine the sky above you, imagine it not as distant, but as inclusive. You are inside it. The gravity holding you is shared with it. There is no separation-only scale. In the end, it is all right to not understand what role the sky plays. It does not require interpretation to function. Some mysteries wait. Others simply continue indifferent to explanation. Tonight the universe whispers again through the slow movement of stars, reminding you that whatever this is test or not, you are already participating, held gently beneath the same sky that has always been there. Earth is often treated as a stage, a passive surface upon which events unfold, but this view dissolves the longer you pay attention. The planet is not a backdrop. It is an active system, responsive, dynamic, and deeply involved in every outcome that occurs upon it. Gravity is not just a force here, it is memory. It remembers mass motion and consequence, holding everything in relation, whether it is noticed or not. From space, Earth appears calm, almost fragile. A thin atmosphere, a soft glow, slow rotation. But this calm is deceptive. Beneath it, energy moves constantly. Mantle currents circulate like slow thoughts. Magnetic fields shift and wander. Water cycles through sky, ice, stone, and life without pause. Earth is always doing something, even when nothing seems to be happening. If Earth were a test, it would not be a neutral testing ground. It would be part of the evaluation itself. The conditions are not arbitrary. The balance between land and sea heat and cold stability and disruption is narrow enough to demand attention, yet wide enough to allow choice. This balance is not forgiving, but it is instructive. It responds clearly to pressure. Life on Earth does not exist despite the planet's volatility. It exists because of it. Variation creates niches. Stress creates adaptation. Without instability, intelligence would never need to anticipate, cooperate, or restrain itself. Earth does not reward comfort. It rewards alignment. Human civilization often behaves as if Earth were inert, a resource bank rather than a participant. This illusion holds only briefly. Soils thin. aquifers empty. Feedback returns in forms that feel external but are deeply internal. The planet is not retaliating, it is responding. Action and consequence are tightly coupled here, even when delay obscures the connection. This responsiveness is what makes Earth such an effective environment for testing intelligence. Cause and effect are not hidden. They are distributed across time. A choice made today echoes decades later. A pattern set now becomes constraint later. This forces long-term thinking, or at least exposes the absence of it. Earth also compresses scale. Individual actions feel insignificant, yet collective behavior reshapes atmosphere and ocean. This duality tests whether intelligence can operate across levels. Can it recognize that small acts accumulate, that systems emerge from repetition? That restraint practiced quietly matters as much as innovation celebrated loudly. There are nights when I have walked across land shaped by processes older than thought, sedimentary layers stacked like unread books, river valleys carved patiently without intent. You feel small there, but not unimportant. You feel placed. Earth has a way of situating awareness within continuity rather than dominance. This sense of placement is often lost in modern abstraction. Data replaces contact. Models replace experience. These tools are powerful, but they can distance intelligence from the system it studies. Earth does not exist in charts. It exists in friction, heat growth, decay. Understanding it requires humility as much as calculation. If Earth is a test, it does not ask whether intelligence can dominate its environment. It asks whether intelligence can belong to it without destabilizing it. Dominance is easy. Belonging is difficult. It requires limits. It requires cooperation not just among individuals but between species systems and timescales. Earth also carries the weight of all previous attempts, not as memory but as constraint. Fossil fuels are stored sunlight from ancient forests. Metals are remnants of stellar processes. Every modern capability is built from compressed histories. Using them without regard for origin accelerates imbalance. Using them thoughtfully extends viability. There is no moral language written into Earth's processes. The planet does not care about intention. It responds to action. This can feel cold, but it is consistent. Consistency allows learning. In a test-like framework, consistency is more valuable than compassion. Compassion must be developed internally. The system merely reveals its absence. Earth also teaches patience. Regeneration takes time. Healing moves slowly. Attempts to rush recovery often cause further harm. This frustrates intelligence accustomed to immediate results. But patience is not optional here. It is structural. Systems that do not respect it fail quietly, then suddenly. Despite this, Earth is not hostile. It is generous within bounds. It supports extraordinary diversity. It tolerates error repeatedly. It allows recovery after immense disruption. These qualities suggest that the test, if it exists, is not designed for elimination, but for refinement. Tonight, observer, consider Earth not as something beneath you, but something around you and within you. The minerals in your bones, the water in your cells, the gravity holding you still. There is no separation. You are a temporary configuration of Earth observing itself. In the end, it is all right to not know whether Earth is a test or simply a system following its nature. What matters is how you move within it, whether you listen to feedback, whether you adjust when signals appear, whether you treat the ground beneath you as disposable or participatory. Some mysteries wait. Others press upward through stone and soil, reminding you that whatever this is, experiment or existence, Earth is not silent. It is always responding. And tonight, as the planet turns beneath you, the universe whispers again through gravity water, and time inviting you not to conquer, but to remain. Every long journey eventually bends back toward its origin, not as repetition, but as recognition. Return does not mean going backward. It means arriving again with altered awareness, after evidence anomaly, silence collapse, echo, and warning. The system curves inward, asking whether anything learned has taken root. In this phase, movement slows, attention narrows. The question is no longer what the universe is doing, but how intelligence responds when it realizes it has been shaped all along. The return is subtle. It does not announce itself with catastrophe or revelation. It arrives as familiarity feeling different, as ordinary routines carrying unfamiliar weight. The same streets, the same skies, the same bodies moving through time, but now noticed. In a test-like environment, this is crucial. Dramatic challenges measure reaction. Return measures integration. On Earth, return appears in cycles, after expansion-contraction, after exploration-settlement, after abstraction-grounding. Civilizations oscillate between outward reach and inward consolidation. Individuals do the same. Curiosity pushes outward until it meets uncertainty, then folds back inward to reorganize meaning. This is not failure, it is processing. If Earth were a test, return would be where scoring becomes possible, not through outcomes but through posture. Does awareness harden into fear or soften into care? Does knowledge isolate or connect? Does power extract or steward? These choices are rarely dramatic. They are daily quiet and cumulative. I have felt this return in long nights after instruments are shut down, when data stops flowing and silence fills the room. Without numbers to analyze, reflection begins. Patterns observed externally start to mirror internally. The same principles apply. Delay creates instability. Balance requires restraint. Ignoring feedback has consequences regardless of intent. Return is also where myth regains relevance. Not as belief, but as compression. Myths are patterns distilled into story. Floods, falls, rebirths. These narratives reappear because they describe return after disruption. They are not predictions. They are reminders that collapse is not the end of meaning, only the end of a particular configuration. Modern culture often resists return. It equates progress with constant forward motion. Slowing feels like regression. Reflection feels unproductive. But systems that never return burn themselves out. They outrun their capacity to integrate. In a testing framework, this behavior would register clearly. Return asks a different set of questions. Not can we do this, but should we continue doing it this way? Not how far can we go, but what must we bring back with us? These questions do not stop progress. They shape it. There is also a personal return embedded in this phase. After contemplating vast systems, the focus narrows to the self, not as center, but as node. Your actions feel heavier now, not because they are grand, but because they are connected. Small decisions ripple outward through networks you cannot fully see. This awareness can feel burdensome at first. Responsibility expands faster than certainty, but over time it becomes grounding. You stop searching for final answers and start listening for alignment. Does this action increase resilience or fragility? Does it widen possibility or narrow it? These are simpler questions and more useful ones. Return also involves acceptance. Acceptance that no test reveals its rubric completely. That ambiguity is not a flaw, but a filter. Those who require certainty before acting will stall. Those who act thoughtfully under uncertainty demonstrate readiness. This distinction matters more than correctness. On Earth, return is mirrored in ecology. After disturbance, succession begins. Pioneer species stabilize conditions. Complexity returns gradually. The system does not recreate the past exactly. It adapts to present constraints. Memory guides, but does not dictate. This balance between remembering and letting go defines resilience. If humanity is in a return phase, the signs would not be dramatic. Increased attention to limits, renewed interest in restoration, re-evaluation of values once assumed permanent. These shifts often feel like retreats from ambition, but they may be prerequisites for continuation. Return also redefines success. Success is no longer measured by expansion alone, but by coherence, by whether systems can sustain themselves without constant intervention, by whether intelligence can choose less when more is available. These metrics are quiet, they resist spectacle. Tonight, Traveller Return does not ask you to solve anything. It asks you to notice what you already know, to carry forward what feels aligned and release what feels excessive. This is not resignation, it is calibration. In the end, it is all right to not understand where return leads. You are not meant to see the entire path. You are meant to walk the path that is visible now. Some mysteries wait. Others circle back, offering another chance to respond differently. Tonight the universe whispers again through familiarity made strange, inviting you to return, not to answers, but to presence. To move forward by standing where you're aware, attentive and willing to belong to whatever this is, test or not, as it continues unfolding. Reflection is where motion pauses without stopping. It is not inactivity, but recalibration. After cycles of expansion, warning and return, awareness turns inward, not to escape the world, but to understand how it has been shaped by it. Reflection is what remains when urgency fades, and the mind finally has space to notice patterns that were always present but never fully seen. In this phase, questions change their tone. They no longer demand answers, they invite alignment. What mattered before begins to feel lighter. What was ignored gains weight. Reflection is uncomfortable at first because it removes distraction. There is no anomaly to chase, no collapse to react to, no sky to interpret. There is only the self situated within everything already described. If Earth were a test, reflection would not be optional. It would be the mechanism by which raw experience becomes learning. Without it, events remain isolated. With it, they connect. Reflection is how intelligence converts consequence into coherence. This is why reflection often arrives late. Systems resist it while momentum carries them forward. Only when speed slows does perspective widen. In human terms, reflection follows crisis, not before it. In planetary terms, it follows thresholds. In personal terms, it follows exhaustion. Timing is not accidental. Reflection requires stillness, and stillness is costly in environments that reward motion. There is a quiet humility in reflection. It strips away the illusion that understanding comes from accumulation alone. Data without interpretation does not transform behavior. Knowledge without integration does not change trajectory. Reflection bridges this gap. It asks not what happened, but what stayed with you afterward. I have experienced reflection in the space between conclusions and beginnings. After long studies end, after instruments are powered down, after explanations satisfy but do not settle. It is in those moments that the deeper questions surface, not loudly, but persistently, not demanding certainty, but attention. Reflection also reveals contradiction. You can hold scientific rigor and existential uncertainty at the same time. You can accept randomness and still feel purpose. These are not opposing states. They coexist comfortably when reflection replaces argument. The need to resolve everything dissolves. What remains is orientation. If Earth is a test, reflection may be what distinguishes participation from performance. Performance optimizes for visible outcomes. Reflection optimizes for internal consistency. A system that performs well under observation but collapses when unobserved has learned nothing durable. Reflection internalizes standards until observation is no longer required. This internalization matters. It is what allows behavior to remain stable even when incentives disappear. It is what allows care to persist when recognition fades. It is what allows restraint to exist without enforcement. From a testing perspective, this would be invaluable data. Reflection also reframes failure. Mistakes become signals rather than verdicts. Patterns of error reveal where understanding was shallow. Reflection does not erase consequence, but it prevents repetition from being automatic. It creates space between stimulus and response. In that space, choice becomes possible again. There is also a collective dimension. Societies reflect through art, philosophy, and ritual. These are not luxuries. They are processing tools. They allow shared experience to be metabolized. When reflection is suppressed, societies repeat harm without recognizing it as repetition. When reflection is encouraged, even painful histories can inform gentler futures. Modern systems often undervalue reflection because it resists measurement. Productivity declines when reflection increases. Output slow. But resilience improves. The absence of immediate return does not mean absence of value. Reflection operates on longer timelines, the same timelines that determine survival. If Earth were not a test, reflection would still matter. It is how meaning emerges from complexity. But if it were a test, reflection might be the point. The place where intelligence proves it can observe itself without collapsing into fear or arrogance. The place where awareness becomes self-sustaining. Reflection does not promise comfort. It reveals responsibility. Seeing patterns makes ignoring them harder. Understanding feedback increases accountability. This is why reflection can feel heavy. But it also brings peace. When you stop pretending not to know, tension releases. You move differently not because you must, but because alignment feels simpler than resistance. Tonight Observer Reflection does not ask you to change everything. It asks you to notice what already wants to change, to listen for dissonance, to recognize coherence when it appears. Reflection is not a verdict. It is a mirror. In the end, it is all right to not know what reflection will produce. Its value is not immediate. It unfolds quietly, altering posture more than position. Some mysteries wait. Others resolve themselves when no longer pursued aggressively. Tonight, the universe whispers again through stillness, inviting you to reflect not on answers, but on orientation, to rest inside awareness without rushing forward, to allow understanding to settle gently, knowing that whatever this is, test or not reflection, is how participation becomes conscious and how consciousness learns to remain. As the questions soften, awareness begins to loosen its grip. Thought no longer reaches outward for explanation nor inward for resolution. It drifts instead, settling into the quiet space where meaning does not need to be held tightly. This is not an ending. It is a descent, gentle and unforced, where understanding yields to rest without loss. In this state, the vast structures we have considered begin to blur at the edges. Epochs fade into rhythm. Patterns dissolve into sensation. The mind stops assembling narratives and starts releasing them. This is where sleep becomes more than recovery. It becomes alignment. A daily surrender to the same cycles that shape planets and stars. If Earth were a test, sleep would not be an interruption. It would be part of the design. Every complex system requires periods of reduced activity to maintain coherence. Memory consolidates, waste clears, signals reorganize. Sleep is a small personal reset that mirrors larger ones across time. In this sense, resting is not passive, it is participation. I've often noticed how clarity arrives not through effort but through letting go. Questions that felt unsolvable during waking hours soften after rest. Tension dissolves. Perspective widens without conscious intent. The mind does its quiet work when control releases. Perhaps intelligence itself requires darkness to integrate what light reveals. Descent into sleep also removes performance. There is no audience here, no metric to optimize, no signal to send. Whatever score is being kept, if any, is not influenced by this moment. That freedom is essential. It allows authenticity to surface without pressure. It allows the system to observe what remains when striving stops. This mirrors something larger. If the universe is watching, it is likely most interested in behavior that persists when reward and consequence are absent. Sleep offers a daily glimpse of that state, when defenses lower, when roles dissolve, when the mind becomes less guarded. What remains is not intention, but disposition. As consciousness fades, scale shifts again. The body becomes the center of experience. Breath weight, warmth. These are not distractions from cosmic thought. They are expressions of it. The same physics that govern stars govern cells. The same cycles that turn galaxies also turn you toward rest. There is no separation here, only continuity. Descent is not collapse, it is trust. Trust that the system will hold you while awareness recedes. Trust that whatever is unresolved can remain unresolved without harm. Trust that not knowing is safe. This trust is learned slowly, often reluctantly, but it is essential for sustainability at every scale. In human culture, descent is often resisted. Sleep is delayed, rest is minimized, stillness is treated as inefficiency. But systems that deny descent accumulate error. They overheat, they fracture. Eventually they are forced to stop. Choosing rest willingly is an act of intelligence. If Earth is a test, the ability to rest may matter as much as the ability to act. Restraint, patience, and recovery are not signs of weakness. They are signs of calibration. A system that cannot pause cannot adapt. A mind that cannot sleep cannot learn. Tonight, traveller, there is nothing left to solve. The patterns have been noticed. The questions have been held. Now they can be released. You do not need to carry them further. They will remain where they belong in the quiet structure of things waiting without urgency. In the end, it is all right to drift, to allow awareness to dim without fear. Some mysteries wait. Others resolve themselves when effort stops. Tonight the universe whispers again through slowing breath and settling thought, inviting you to descend gently into sleep, knowing that whatever this existence is test or not rest, is part of how it continues. At the far edge of thought, where questions lose their sharpness and curiosity softens into calm, there is a quiet recognition that nothing more needs to be decided tonight. The universe does not rush toward conclusions, and neither must you. Whatever this existence is, test or chance design or emergence, it continues whether it is understood or not, and so do you breathing steadily within it. If Earth was a test, then it was never meant to be solved like a puzzle with a single answer. It was meant to be lived. Tests that reveal something meaningful rarely announce their criteria. They observe posture rather than performance consistency, rather than intensity response rather than belief. They watch how awareness behaves when certainty is unavailable and when outcomes are unclear. In that sense, the most important moments were never the dramatic ones. They were the quiet decisions made when no one seemed to be watching, the pauses before reacting, the restraint exercised without recognition, the care extended without guarantee of return. These moments leave no monument, yet they shape trajectories far more reliably than any visible achievement. Throughout this journey, patterns have emerged and receded, not demanding obedience, only attention. Earth responded to pressure. Life adapted to instability. Intelligence struggled, reflected, adjusted, and sometimes failed. None of this suggests condemnation, it suggests process. A long patient unfolding where nothing is wasted, not even collapse. The idea of a test can feel heavy at first. It can sound like judgment, like surveillance, like expectation imposed from beyond. But viewed differently, it becomes lighter. A test implies possibility. It implies that effort matters even when outcomes are uncertain. It implies that awareness is not accidental but useful. And if the test is not real, if this is simply a universe following its nature, then nothing is lost by living as though your actions matter beyond the immediate. Meaning still emerges from care. Stability still benefits from restraint. Connection still softens isolation. The behaviors inspired by the idea of a test remain valuable, regardless of its truth. There is a strange peace in this symmetry. Whether watched or unwatched existence responds the same way. Harm accumulates, care stabilizes, excess destabilizes, balance extends duration. These are not moral claims, they are observations. The universe does not require belief to function. It responds to alignment, not intention. At this final edge of reflection, the question of outcome fades. Graduation or failure continuation, or reset reward or erasure. These possibilities belong to scales beyond personal control. Fixating on them only tightens the mind. What remains accessible is simpler and quieter. How you move through the moment you are in. How you treat the system you are part of. How gently or harshly you interact with others, navigating the same uncertainty. If there is an evaluation, it is ongoing and impersonal. It does not wait for perfection. It registers direction. Are you moving toward coherence or fragmentation? Toward awareness or avoidance? Toward integration or extraction? These vectors matter more than milestones. There is also permission here. Permission to be incomplete. Permission to rest without resolving everything. Permission to accept that some questions function better as companions than as problems to be eliminated. Curiosity does not require closure to remain alive. I have come to trust that whatever intelligence may exist beyond this system, if any, would not be impressed by certainty alone. Certainty is easy to perform. It is harder to remain open without becoming unanchored. It is harder to care without assurance. It is harder to act thoughtfully when no rulebook is visible. Those difficulties are not flaws. They are the conditions under which authenticity appears. As this final moment settles, notice the absence of urgency. Nothing is being demanded. Nothing is being proven. The universe does not lean closer when you think the right thought, nor does it recoil when you are uncertain. It simply continues vast and indifferent, yet permissive enough to allow meaning to arise within it. This is where the story ends, not with revelation, but with quiet continuity. Tomorrow will arrive whether this idea stays with you or fades. Choices will present themselves in ordinary forms. Words spoken, silences kept, attention given or withheld. These are the real expressions of whatever you have absorbed. If Earth is a test, then you are already taking it by existing. If it is not, then you are still shaping a life that touches others, alters environments, and leaves subtle traces that ripple outward beyond perception. Either way, nothing more is required of you right now. Sleep does not erase significance, it restores capacity. It allows the mind to loosen its grip and the body to recalibrate. In sleep, you surrender control without surrendering existence. You trust that continuity does not depend on vigilance alone. So let the thoughts slow. Let the questions dissolve into background hum. You have gone far enough for tonight. Whatever is being measured, if anything, will continue without your supervision. Some mysteries wait. Others dissolve when no longer pursued. And some simply remain quiet and unresolved, shaping behavior without ever becoming clear. Sleep traveler. The cosmos will keep watch, or it will not. Either way, the night holds you gently, and the experiment, if it exists, continues exactly as it should. As sleep deepens, even the idea of an ending begins to soften. What remains is not conclusion, but continuity. The universe does not close chapters cleanly. It layers them, allowing one state to blur into the next. Waking becomes dreaming. Question becomes atmosphere. Meaning becomes texture rather than statement. In this quiet extension, you're no longer required to hold the thought of a test at all. It can drift like a distant star present without demand. Whether Earth measures, observes, or simply unfolds, the effect on this moment is the same. Breath moves in and out. Gravity holds you gently in place. Time continues at its patient pace. There is something deeply stabilizing about recognizing that you do not need to carry the weight of interpretation alone. Whatever larger structure exists, if any, has been operating long before you noticed it and will continue long after this moment fades. Your role was never to manage it, only to participate within it honestly. Participation does not require effort now. It requires rest. Muscles loosen. Thoughts lose their edges. Identity thins into sensation. This is not disappearance. It is integration. Just as ecosystems recover during stillness, and minds reorganize during darkness, awareness finds its balance by letting go. If there is learning in this test, it does not stop when you sleep. The body remembers. The nervous system recalibrates. Experiences settle into patterns beneath conscious recall. You are changed slightly by every day you live, not through force, but through accumulation. Sleep allows those changes to take their place without resistance. So allow yourself to drift without needing to arrive anywhere. There is no finish line waiting in the dark, only continuation, gentle and unpressured. Tomorrow will unfold in its own way, shaped by countless variables beyond control and a few small choices within reach. For now, nothing more is asked of you. Not understanding, not vigilance, not certainty, just rest. Sleep traveler. Whether watched or unwatched, measured or unmeasured, you're held within the same quiet order that turns planets and calms oceans, and that is enough for tonight. We've reached the edge of tonight's journey, traveller, where the questions grow quieter and the answers no longer insist on being found. What we trace together through ancient silences, fragile probabilities, and the long arc of time doesn't resolve into certainty. It settles instead into something gentler, like dust returning to stone, like starlight thinning before dawn. Whether Earth is a test or simply a turning page in a far larger story, the universe continues on its patient course. Epochs pass, signals fade, patterns repeat in forms we almost recognize. Somewhere gravity keeps its slow promise, and time carries every memory forward without comment. We are small within this motion, but never insignificant brief witnesses learning to listen. There is comfort in not forcing the mystery closed. Some truths don't demand answers, only presence. To stand beneath the vastness and feel the weight of wonder without fear is its own kind of knowing. Science names the mechanisms. Silence holds the meaning between them. As this story dims, let it remain unfinished. Let it follow you softly, not as a burden, but as a quiet companion, an awareness that even the smallest moment belongs to something immeasurably old. If the universe is watching, it watches patiently. If it is not, the stars still burn indifferent and beautiful. Rest now, traveller. Set the questions down. The cosmos will keep watch through the night, and the story, like all true stories, will be here when you return.